the more theater can do more and more and can tell more kinds of stories, the longer it's going to stay alive. Howdy, citizens! It's time to sit down, put in those earbuds so as not to disturb the neighbors, and join us for another episode of Off Book, a podcast where we talk all about Broadway, movies, TV shows, and anything else we feel like geeking out about. I'm Marc Stoufer III.
And I'm Szurna. Today we're going to be talking about some of the history of theater and why it's even around.
Yeah, I mean, theater's been around for over 2,000 years, and the fact that it's still around and still very topical, it isn't just some old thing that certain people like, is very impressive. And even looking forward, there are a lot of things that theater's doing to continue to stay fresh and new and adapt to its situation.
Yeah. And I definitely think that even like since it's been around for so long and why it's continuing to be around is it's always brought so much entertainment to people. Like, especially with Shakespeare. Like Shakespeare in his time, like he was like the all-knowing everything. Like he was not really, but he was a god to them, you know?
Yeah. The theater started back with the Greeks as a way to help to glorify the gods they worshipped. And most notably Dionysus, who became eventually the god of theater. And it kind of continued to grow and adapt to where it used to just be dancing with some music, and then one person, I forget who it was, off the top of my head, but he started reading poetry in character, and then people started writing longer pieces with more fleshed out characters, and eventually it moved to China and then medieval Europe, and that's where it started to become the kind of full production it is, where you start to do things like Shakespeare, and then as society continued, the language of the show continued to change, and it eventually moved to America, and we started to develop, it was a more modern language with more modern characters. We had things like the opera, but then we eventually created the vaudeville show, which eventually kind of turned into this hybrid that is the musical, and we started building theaters just for that. And eventually that became what we know now as Broadway over in New York City, which is ironic considering how many other Broadway streets there are, that name has become synonymous with theater, even though it really has nothing to do with theater. Broadway literally just means, it's a wide road. But throughout history, it's continued to change and adapt, and I think that's the reason it's still alive, is because it isn't still, there is some Shakespeare still, but that's not all of what theater is.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy to me to see how much it's even changed from the 1700s to now. Like, even in that time difference it's insane about how much it's grown and adapted. And like from back in Shakespeare's time, it went from talking the way they talked, and then in the 1700s talking the way they talked, and now how we are. Like, it's just crazy to see the difference that much time makes.
Yeah, and also the kinds of stories that theater is telling have changed dramatically too. If you look at something like Macbeth or Romeo and Juliet, we're going to talk a lot about Shakespeare, so those kinds of stories are very different stories than if you look at even something like Hamilton is a different plot structure, and you have this kind of two-act structure. The intermission didn't even really exist back then. We started to introduce it. I think it started in America, but I could be wrong. It could have started over in Europe, but we started to create this new structure, and even the dynamic between the performers and the audience has changed. Back in the days of Shakespeare and before, the audience was a part of the experience. It was very much like doing a concert where you're here and we're going to reference you and we're going to go into the audience, and this is the thing. And somehow along the way, it kind of changed into this, we're on a stage and we're telling the story, and that's where breaking the fourth wall comes in. That was something that happened so often then that wasn't a thing that was considered. But now, the stage kind of lives in its own universe, and the audience isn't really there unless it needs to be. And I think that that's just what people expect now with the introduction of film and television. They expect something that's kind of its own medium that they could watch rather than participate in. And I think that Broadway and theater in general has found those ways to continue to adapt to whatever people want to see.
Yeah. And one part of theater that I've always found to be very interesting is opera. Like, it's not your normal talking. It's not just like singing like how we hear nowadays. It's this completely different style that a lot of people aren't used to, and I've always found it so interesting. And I don't really know of many places that still do opera. They probably do in Europe still a little bit, but in America we don't really have operas. But it's just that part of theater has always been so interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think that the fact that operas still do exist, albeit a little bit less frequently, is a testament to theater continues to adapt, but it also doesn't just say, okay, we're done with Shakespeare now. I mean, Shakespeare is still performed. Dance has become its own kind of separate thing. There are concerts, there are operas still going on, there are straight plays, even though we've introduced the musical element. And I think that the fact that it knows this is what we need to keep and this is what we need to change, but also let's continue to do this quote unquote old form of the art, because there are still people that enjoy it. And I think that's why what constitutes theater is so broad now.
Mm-hmm. And like, I personally have never seen an opera, but I want to, because I feel like being into theater so much, I feel like I should see at least one opera. You know, I've seen Phantom of the Opera, but that's not an opera.
I mean, kind of, but also not.
Yeah, but not.
And it's a rock opera, which is kind of.
Yeah.
But
and one that I know of that's very popular is Hannibal.
Yes.
And I know that they do still perform that in Europe. I know there are opera houses in America that still perform opera, but I'm not completely sure what they do. But I definitely want to make it a thing to go see an opera.
Yeah. And now, a word from our sponsor. Today's sponsor is actually all the way from back when theater was first invented.
Really?
Yeah, the creators of theater time traveled forward to the present day and saw how well theater worked out, so they have another invention to advertise. Jim, all yours.
So we noticed that a lot of people wanted to go see our shows, but they couldn't because the theater was so full. And so what we decided to do, if enough of you donate, is we're going to hire a whole bunch of painters. And each painter will paint a different second of the show. So once the show is over, we'll have like a recreation of the production, so you can come to the theater and look at the paintings, and it'll be like being there. You can laugh, and you can cry, and you can throw tomatoes at the... No, please don't throw tomatoes. Never mind. Don't do the last one. Anyway, so you know what we should do? We should build a whole separate building and put a lot of rooms in that building. And then each room is a different show. And then you can bring your friends, and you can eat snacks, and you can watch as many as you want. It'll be exactly like being maybe not exactly. Maybe we'll do some things you couldn't do live. We're not gonna be planting aliens or flying or anything. But yeah. So what do you think? Do you think people will like it?
Did he just invent the movie 1,000 Years Early?
I think so. Jim, you know what? It sounds great. Keep working on it. Anyway, back to the main program. I think throughout history there have been some shows that have kind of defined that era, similar to how Shakespeare kind of became the standard for shows at that time. I think you find shows like Hair, that was the first rock opera, that taught, hey, rock can be in musicals too. It doesn't have to be this other style of music that we were using before. And I think that the fact that, shows like that are the ones that continue to be revived and continue to be reinterpreted. Because there are a lot of shows, I was thinking about this, there are a lot of shows that are reinvented and are presented in new ways. And I think you get some of that with like live TV musicals where it gets reimagined. There was a local production of Peter Pan that I had heard about, where it was set in a modern day city. So like Captain Hook was a drug dealer, and Peter Pan was this kid that was trying to stay little and was trying not to grow up and become this drug addict, and Smee was the right. It was really weird, but I think that some shows just have that kind of power to entirely reinvent what theater means in that era, and I think that those are the shows that continue to be revived and continue to get people thinking. Were there any shows that come to mind for you when you think of shows that kind of reinvented what theater is?
Well, for one, this is a movie, but the Romeo and Juliet with Leonardo DiCaprio in it. Okay. And how it was changed from being that old, straight up Shakespeare into kind of more of a modern feel. It kind of gave me like the Great Gatsby vibes, but like just with the way the whole party scene was set up, and But that is one show that I thought like it was turned into something very interesting. But another thing is bringing, one thing that I thought was cool is bringing rap into theater.
I was going to mention that.
Yeah. So like, especially with Lin-Manuel Miranda in The Heights, in Hamilton.
Mhm.
So like just introducing these genres into theater when you normally think they wouldn't fit very well, but then they ended up fitting very well.
Yeah. I think that we're, as recording this in the year 2020, I think that we're kind of on the verge of another change in music, because at first it was the very traditional opera style, and then we started introducing some genres like rock, but you ended up with this what people call musical theater songs, where it sounds kind of like some genres, but it's this very watered down version. And I think you still get some of that watered downness when you go with edgier music like rock, like pop, like even hip hop. But I think that you're starting to introduce those genres where you have more contemporary music. If you listen to something like Dear Evan Hansen, that sounds more like something you'd find on the radio than something you'd find in the golden age of musicals. And I think that those shows that dare to say, hey, this musical style is cool, what if we use that? And people go, that's stupid, and then they watch the musical and go, that's cool.
Yeah.
And I think it's those shows that kind of define, this is what we're doing with theater now, because everybody wants to hop on that train of hip-hop and ride it to money. And then that just becomes what you do until 20 years from now, when we're going to start using, we're going to go back to slam poetry. A musical of spoken word.
Spoken word musical.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the other, like, one thing that I always thought was interesting was Shrek the musical.
Okay, yeah.
It went from a movie that has no singing in it to a musical. So it's like, it's weird to see how you could like take something like that and adapt it into theater, which is kind of interesting to me. Was it super amazing?
Right.
In my opinion, not really. It wasn't my favorite. But just taking that and then having that is like, it's weird to me. But I just wonder if maybe we'll be seeing more of that in the future of Broadway.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to the conversation we were having a couple of weeks ago about adaptations on Broadway, and how there's kind of been a huge surge in a show that was based on something else rather than original shows. And I like I said a couple of weeks ago, I think that comes down to that's what people are going to see. And I think that that's another point, that even in terms of musical style, theater isn't just deciding, they're not just spinning a wheel of genres going, all right, this year Broadway is going to be full of disco music, so do that in your shows. Although to be fair, a disco musical would be kind of awesome. If you're listening to this and you want to write a disco musical, tell us and we will be happy.
Like Saturday Night Live, but a musical.
That would be. I was going to say that would be ridiculous, but I'm sure somebody's currently writing that. So if you're doing that, keep it up. I will love to see it when it opens on Broadway in the year 2025. No, but I think that the musical style and the story choice and the dynamic of theater is often driven by what do people want. As people continue to live and make choices and decisions, they will like or dislike certain things, and I think those are the things that theater will reflect. Theater is a really good medium, I think, for tackling things that are important, because it doesn't need to hit you over the head with it like a lot of other mediums do, but it can introduce you to people that are actually going through it, rather than giving you statistics or facts. It can tell you this story and you can connect on a deeper level. So I think that in the end, theater is going to continue to be whatever people outside of theater want to see and whatever people inside theater want to make.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And we're finding, as new technology continues to be integrated into theater, that we're really getting this new wave of kinds of shows where you kind of have this minimalist style that's coming, but you also have, like, Dear Evan Hansen didn't even have a set. It was some platforms with little vignettes, but also these huge LED panels. And that wasn't something that could have existed a couple years ago. You have projections used as set. You have projection mapping to create elements of sets that can be physical and then can turn into digital. You have things like even augmented reality to continue to show these locations. And you're finding that with the introduction of robotics, with the introduction of better sound systems and equipment, you're getting this experience that is, I think it's straying further and further from what the movie is. And I think that's, for me as a filmmaker, I think that's good, because I think that movies can do very well. They can get you up close and personal. And I think that theater can't really do that. So right now, theater has the ability to be live, and that's great. But I think that the more complex it can get to an extent, we don't want robots. Although I'm sure somebody's writing a robotic musical. So keep doing that too. In 2025, we're just gonna have an off-book Broadway-a-thon, and we're gonna see all the shows that I was joking and mentioning, and somebody out there's writing now. So let's do that. See you in 5 years.
Do that.
But I think you're getting all these layers to shows that are just making the experience more and more rich, and are being able to tell so many new kinds of stories because of the kinds of effects and things you can do that you couldn't before. And I think that that's one of the things that's going to propel Broadway and theater in general for several, well, at least 5 years, because we need to have a festival.
Yeah. And like another thing with that is, once again, Hamilton's a great example for a lot of stuff.
It is.
But the moving floors, like.
Yes, yeah, there's a turntable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also the moving props on that stage.
Yeah, exactly. And so really the only like prop they had was the big like balcony thing with the stairs.
Right.
And I thought that was just so cool, because when they're walking through New York, they're giving a sense of walking. They're not just like going across the stage a few feet. It's like actually continuously walking. But the issue is like they wouldn't be able to change set super easy. So I always thought those, like the turntables, was just a great way to make that walking and moving easier for the audience to understand.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think that, I mean, you're right, Hamilton is a pretty good example of, pretty much everybody in that show hit it out of the park with their respective categories, whether it's the set design or the costume design or the music. We talked all about that. We gushed all over Hamilton in the first episode. Go listen to that if you want to hear us obsess over how awesome that show is. We don't need to do it again here. But it's kind of, I think that Hamilton looks a lot like what future shows will look like on Broadway, in my opinion, because it uses that technology. It doesn't use projections, and I think that's one of the things that projection and LED screens, I think that I'm starting to see those being used more. But Hamilton didn't need those. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying that that's something else that it's being used. But I think they used the new music style. They're using that creative license more and more, I think, because they're starting to say, you can see stories of people in real life, but what if we show you a story of a person that is not quite something you could see? And then they're kind of pushing the envelope with what can happen. I mean, there's a King Kong musical with a giant, however many feet tall, King Kong puppet, and that's just ridiculous to me. Even Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, which didn't do well critically, and we keep mentioning that. We should really do an episode on that. Let us know in the comments if we should do an episode on that. But all the stunt work they were able to do when people weren't falling and hurting themselves was really incredible. And I think that the more theater can do more and more and can tell more kinds of stories, the longer it's going to stay alive.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Well, that concludes today's History and the Future of Broadway. Many thanks for embarking on this journey with us.
Make sure you join us next week when we'll be talking about film scoring and the importance of music at the movies and scene. See you next week.